Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Well, the 2021 British and Irish Lions tour to South Africa, it's just around the corner and we'll have you covered every step of the way, starting with the first warm-up match this weekend against Japan. Ahead of the tour, lots of question marks surrounding South Africa, but they've not played a game since winning the World Cup way back in 2019. But one man who will know about the threat the Springboks could offer is the current England's forward coach, Matt Proudfoot. He was the assistant coach for South Africa's 2019 World Cup winning side, and he'll be joining with us to discuss the Lions series as well as England's up-and-coming tour this summer. Away from the Lions, if the Bristol Quins game wasn't the best club game I've seen, Premiership game I've ever seen, it was certainly in the top one. An astonishing comeback from 28-0 down to beat Bristol, earn themselves a spot in the final. Ben Coles was there for Telegraph, and he'll join us a little later to relive what was an incredible afternoon at Ashton Gate. And as ever, we'll be answering all your questions too. Delighted to say that alongside me, particularly with what's coming up, again is the former South African captain and, let's not forget, World Cup winner, Bob Skinstad. Bob, I recently spoke to John Schmidt, who told me that the appetite for this Lions series was massive. What's your take on that?
Oh, I agree with him, Brian. I think there's been uncertainty because of current extenuating circumstances, let's say, around the world. But certainly for the last 4 years, everybody's been licking their chops. Everyone loves the Lions coming to town. They love the fact that there's the sort of harking back to touring rugby. Mm-hmm. Some of the younger players and let's say development South Africa A and those South African Barbarians get to play games against him. The provincial sides get to play against him. And then the test match, we've been really lucky that a couple of times that the Lions have toured in the last couple of years, they've been taking on the world champions. Yep. And they're taking them on again. So it's really a tour and a sort of a focus for South African fans that's been a long time coming. Well,
from over here, it's been alleged we don't even get the true picture in this country about what's going on with COVID, but certainly with South Africa, we have no real idea what's going on the ground. And I wondered if you had more of an idea with your insight and just how the things shifted. And because originally I thought, yeah, let's tour because Lions were touring side. And then when I saw games played without crowds and then I saw with crowds, I changed my mind and thought, look, if we can get half full or even a third full over here, which will include a lot of Boks fans, because there are a lot of Boks fans over here, yep, then that would be preferable. And I was actually quite surprised when it went back to what I'd originally thought. I mean, you saw it going up and down and coming to and fro. How did that all relate to what you were hearing from everyone over there?
Well, I mean, you make a great point. There's something that you sort of want in your heart, and then you try and impose that on the current situations. Doesn't always work. I mean, caveat, I'm not medical. I can't say where the rates are of infection, etc. in South Africa. I know that the number of vaccinations is very low in terms of a comparable to the UK. And I do know that there is a bit of a feeling of that recently schools have locked down again. And, I've got a lot of friends of mine who are saying for the first time they're feeling it. South Africa, remember, there isn't the public transport system that you have here in the upper echelons of sort of working society. So a guy like me going to work on a train and a tube here in the UK, that doesn't really happen in South Africa. You're in the bubble of your own car, etc. And people won't necessarily be as close to each other. So I think the first wave or two, they didn't really feel the same pressure to isolate, etc. as we do. And now suddenly I'm getting from my friends, family, my mum, they're saying, wow, this person's sick, that person's sick, there isn't access to beds, etc. And I'm going, sure, but maybe actually this is better without fans, because I know that the Lions will be in a bubble, the Springboks will be in a bubble and have been in a bubble for a long time. But I'm ambivalent. I'm not sure. I went to Parky Scarlets the other day for one of these Rainbow Cup fixtures, and we started the game looking out over the field. The players were there. There wasn't a single fan. There was management from each team, and it was like a training run. But they'd started. There was a kick-off. It was a bone-crunching tackle. You could hear it from 50 meters away. Usually the crowd would be behind that. So there's an element to me that feels sorry for the players. I am glad it's going ahead. I would have rather it we got this all behind us, but when will it be behind us? In a way, I think I'm delighted that at least the players will get to see South Africa, the fans will get to see rugby, and those are the wins.
The thing is, if they don't go, people are saying, "Oh, we'll just swap it with us." So you can't just do that.
No, you
because
can't.
They want it. And
it's 100 years of history and legacy.
You may have missed it for
12 years.
Another 8.
Exactly.
So you talk about 2 generations of players.
Yeah.
Your memories of the Lions series in South Africa made your debut shortly after the '97 tour.
Yep.
Were you close to making the side?
You talk about a generation of players missing it. So I made my debut in '97 after the Lions tour, which was in the middle of the year that year, and that was over here. And then I retired after 2007, and they came back in 2009. So I played 1 game against the Lions for my province.
Yep.
Lost the game, but Conor O'Shea, I think it was, made a fantastic sidestep, scored a try. Western Pro, I think it was 32-18 or 32-20. Met a lot of the players in for the very first time and have become friends with them forever. So I love the concept of the Lions. I was watching that game and saying to myself, this is something we should be winning. There was a disorganised team at the time, a bit of a shambles in South African rugby and presidents and all that kind of thing. Coral du Plessis was the coach. He got kicked out shortly afterwards. But and the Lions famously won a fantastic series, So I watched all of the test matches and loved it to bits. I don't like losing much, a bit like yourself, so I won't apologise for that. But it certainly kept the spirit of the Lions and the touring Lions idea alive. They'd knocked over the world champions.
Well, we were talking, you hinted about this. So the Springboks, they've not played since 2019. Now, Argentina showed, when they went and beat the All Blacks after not playing for a year, that you can start hitting the ground running. And I would imagine that the way that South Africa work, and this is not a derogatory, Tim, the simplicity of their game, the nature, the physical nature of the game, lends itself, to being able to bring back quickly. But this is the point. You mentioned the completely different atmosphere with playing with no fans. Now, we were chatting before, and you were saying that some of the Bulls who played the weekend, 4 of their players had never played in front of a crowd. And certainly, a lot of the Springboks might have played with no crowds for their various clubs or provinces, but as a side together, not at all.
No, well, I mean, you're right. I was lucky enough to watch this Rainbow Cup final. Benetton knocked the Bulls over. I mean, Benetton have not won against the South African provincial side. They've had a few okay results in the Rainbow Cup, but they didn't win a game in the Pro 14.
Yeah.
And they put a performance on the field which was extraordinary. But Benetton had 1,400 supporters in a little 5,000-seater stadium. It was electric. It was just amazing to be there with a crowd behind. And I think that was all the difference. And I watched these wide-eyed kids from Pretoria come onto the field. They'd never, ever played in front of a crowd. And they've been playing at Loftus, which can hold 50,000 people.
Oh, well, I mean, iconic venue. To be able to see about a Marie Celeste, wasn't it, when there was no one in there?
Well, exactly.
Well, I mean, we were talking, people were saying, oh, surely it didn't make that much difference. And
it definitely does.
When you do something well and a crowd cheers you for every single thing that you do well, you throw the ball in straight, which is what you're supposed to do, and you catch it and there's a cheer.
Yeah.
And a kick goes up and it's caught. And you knock people over the chair. Everything, it sustains you, doesn't it, in a way that I can't explain it, fully. What maybe you can do better.
No, but think about it. If you're watching a high school rugby game and things, they're 10 points behind, but there's 10, 15 minutes to go, and suddenly someone makes a break, and there's a bit of a ripple of applause amongst the parents, and then that try's scored, and now you're 3 points behind, and you can actually just feel the 16th man almost, sort of immerse himself in the team on the ground. Now, you think about, in this particular game, Italian supporters who haven't watched rugby for 15 months, and Treviso's a rugby mad town, as you know, they were celebrating, hooting, clapping every backward step from the Bulls. So a line-out drive, the tackle, whatever, and it definitely made a difference. And I think it will make a difference in these games. I just don't know, and we haven't been given the exact format. Will there be half a stadium full of people? Will there be a quarter? Will there be 3,000 people, 5,000 people? And
is that still up to grabs?
They haven't declared the final numbers.
Because even 5,000 supporters.
It would be massive. The problem is South Africa are going backwards in terms of infections, so they might say nobody. So I think you're right. It's going to make a difference, but we just don't know how much.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the Lions squad? There's been a bit of comment from one outlet in South Africa. You can't take this as gospel for the whole people. Describing the Lions pack of back row players as hobbits because of their size and agility. Well, hobbits turned out to be quite useful in the end, didn't they?
Exactly. If we're on a quest to find the ring, no. Look, I completely and utterly disagree with that because I think I've watched the England loose forwards. Look, Simmons, his inclusion, having not really played international, is irrelevant to me. The Premiership standard is so high. The games he's been playing, I mean, yes, he's a try-scoring forward, but if you just watch the contributions, the offloads, the tackles, and then you look at watch Hamish Watson and the effect he had on some of the games in the competitive internationals that we've seen. It doesn't matter how big you are. If Hamish Watson is a hobbit, I promise you he's going to nick the ball off South Africa. What I'm more concerned about is that if that is the sentiment among some of the news sort of journalists in South Africa, then they're missing the whole point. I don't think that's a sentiment in the squad or with Rassie Erasmus. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's being said in the papers there. I think they've missed the point. They've said, we're going to get our big, strong, loose forwards and you're going to smash over them. I heard a lovely quote this week. They said they were in the words used to describe Ergier Snyman and others, flimsy will not be needed. And I thought that's a lovely way. Yeah. And then I saw a picture of him playing in Japan with his scrum half next to him. He didn't even go up to his belly button. So yes, they're big men and yes, they're strong. But like you've said before, and I agree, the big men, the tall timber still comes crashing down when you go around the ankles. And if they can't lift a Hamish Watson or someone off competing a ball, they're gonna steal that ball. I mean, remember. Well,
if you go back, you go. I mean, South Africa have always had big forwards. Yeah. They've always had big players.
Exactly.
That just happens as a race. You go back to the '97 things, the historical things, and you pick players, relatively dwarf-like, not even hobbits, dwarfs, like Tom Smith. Who turned out to be, a
one of the greatest ever. Exactly.
These sort of things do happen. I just wonder about, because when you've got players like Tipuric, a very clever player, very good footballer. Curry also, when he makes the right decisions and so on, they pose a different challenge to just the physical aspect. And I just wonder whether the Boks will take that on board, or they'll say, right, tell you what, we won't worry about you, you won't worry about us. You stop us first, and we'll worry about you if we need to. Will it be that way around, or will they be a bit of a precursor to, I don't know?
No, I think you make a good point. Where I think you've got it exactly right is guys like Tipuric are an incredible link between the forwards and the backs. So the forwards can do their job. The 9 and 10 will get it to the outside backs. But if you're in third, fourth and fifth phase, you need a skilled loose forward to do something. That it might be a one-handed offload that releases a Williams outside him. And we saw some of the famous tries in New Zealand where the last pass inside was to a flanker who'd been waiting, almost just knowing that his only job in this whole thing was going to be to carry the ball for the last metre that you needed to score the try. And Tipuric, for me, is very clever. He links the Welsh backs and forwards. And if you can play all of those loose forwards in a similar role, South Africa will know they've not only got to knock you back on your set piece, but they've got to be aware for 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 phases that these clever and skilled loose forwards can play a bigger role as well.
England suffered badly in the scrum in the World Cup final, and that was the basis of the South African win. Unashamedly, I don't have a problem with that because that's part of the game. Can you see the Boks looking at the Lions squad and thinking could do a similar job here?
No, I think if you look at the combination now of all the other countries coming in, where unfortunately, England suffered an injury in the first couple of seconds of that, or first couple of minutes of that game, so there was no extra person to come on. But the Springboks had what they've sort of playfully termed the bomb squad, which was this reserve. Yeah. I mean, and you saw them; they looked like kids arriving at a candy shop. They could not wait to get on and just dominate that scrum for the next. I think they had 35 minutes to go or 32 minutes to go, and they just, and we've seen how Vincent Koch and the guys have dominated here in Premiership as well. Yep. They came on after. The other players had taken the front row on for 55 minutes already. So I think the Springboks will know that if you add Wales and Ireland and Scotland into the mix, you're not just going to have, Dan Cole against the his opposition. Now you've got a couple of other players coming in. You've got more quality on the bench. You've got more players to draw on, so they won't be able to dominate as quickly. They'll still try and dominate, and they'll try and find cracks, but it's a different proposition.
Right, time now to speak to Matt Proudfoot, the England forwards coach. Welcome, Matt. Firstly, how are the preparations going for the up-and-coming summer fixtures with England?
Yeah, we had a good training week last week, Brian. A lot of new young players into the group. A lot of excitement and enthusiasm in the training sessions. So it was good to get an opportunity to work with a lot of new players. And then the squad was announced on Sunday, and we've been together now. This is our second day together, so it's good to have the squad together. Got our hands on the players this morning, and got a nice line-out session this afternoon. So it's going good. I
mean, you'd be used to working with very experienced players, and because of the way it's turned out with Lions duty, there's 22 uncapped players. Now that is really unusual, and in the forwards having a lot of uncapped players it would seem to me to be more of a challenge. Have you got anything? Would we approach it any different because of their lack of experience or not?
Ron, the level of forward play in the Premiership is so high that these players are coming in and they're really well conditioned. They're really well versed in the arts of set piece and what it takes to play a similar game to Test match rugby. What they play week in and week out in the Premiership. So from that perspective, there's not they've got a great skill set. So it's about what is our mindset and what is the plan as a collective for the pack that you need to put in place. So I suppose that is new coaching because the existing players know that. But it's just good to see the energy of these players. They all understand that they've got an opportunity to create a Test career for themselves, and we get players that are well aware of what they need to do to become Test players, and then they start working. It's an exciting experience. It's an experience to be really humbled by, that you're part of the birth of somebody's Test career.
We'll be looking ahead to the Lions series, but I just wanted to get your take on South Africa. I mean, the last time they played a match, you were part of the coaching team back in 2019. This long delay, can you with any certainty predict what effect, if any, it will have?
Look, Rassie will have them well prepared. I think that's one thing you need to understand about Rassie is he will have done his homework or what he needs to do. He will have created an environment where he can best prepare that team. I understand they're already preparing in Bloemfontein. And he's following the very similar path that I can understand as what he did for the World Cup. So their preparation will be very similar. They've got a couple of warm-up games. So I think that's an environment a Springbok team is comfortable in, is when their back's against the wall, when there's a bit of adversity to them, and Rassie will come in and give them a clear plan, and that bodes well for them.
Matt, Bob here. I've got to ask, I know you're mates with Rassie, you've had a professional relationship for a number of years. Are you in touch? Is there crossover? Do you know any of the background? I mean, I know Jacques is, let's call it the poster boy in front at the moment, but if I know Rassie like I've known him for the last 20 years, there's no way he's going to let go of the control to the full extent that people think he might. Jacques is a tactician in his own right. What do you see as Rassie lending to that party, and have you heard anything from him?
What I can understand, Bob, is it's more about the relationship in which they function together. Okay. Jacques is very, very detailed, and I think Rassie's just empowered Jacques to take a day-to-day running of the team, particularly around line-outs.
Is that Rassie calling you?
Yeah. He said, "Shut up, be quiet."
So I think Jacques will do the day-to-day running of the plan, which will free Rassie up to be more strategic.
Yes, I think so.
Where he likes to be. That frees headspace up, that he can think about those things that are going to make a difference, and then bring that in and let Jacques run the day-to-day running of the team. They've had a fantastic, strong relationship since the army days.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think he's just taken that to another level. With the inclusions of Dion, who's really experienced. He's worked with a lot of the South African players at age group level. Felix has been there for a time in their relationship they've had at Munster. So I think it's just more solidified their relationship and their working environment, which allows Rassie to maybe just take a little bit of a step back and look at things with a different perspective.
That correlates with my thinking. People have been asking, is it going to change? So Rassie's there. He's in a position where you can see everything happening. What do you think they are saying about this series? What are they prepping for that's different to a World Cup campaign? Lions is something that's completely out on its own in terms of World Rugby.
I think the difference is they've got to hit the ground running with the Lions campaign. You lose the first test, you're on the back foot.
Yeah.
So I think there might be a bit of similarity with the World Cup and the All Black game, but you had opportunity to build momentum leading up to the quarterfinals. We knew you had to win one out of the two, Italy or the All Blacks, to be in a quarterfinal, and then it was 3 big games back to back. I think the difference is your first game is against a highly motivated Lions team in Cape Town. And I think that's a tough challenge. If you come out of that 7 days later, you've got them again, or a couple of days later, you've got them again. And I think that's different. Is that you don't have time to, if you're not on it from minute one, you don't have time to build up into a Lions series.
Yeah.
You've got to apply pressure, and that's how South Africa did well in the previous Lions series. For that first game, they put the Lions scrum under pressure, and they had the Lions on the back foot. So I think Rassie will look at that as a recipe of how does he create momentum early.
Well, that's something I was just going to come on to, Matt. Springboks traditionally, and quite rightly so, have been linked with the physical nature of the game, the power of the forward game. And I see no reason to go into this series without that at the forefront of the mind, not just bearing in mind the number of English players or people that might be in the pack and the success of what happened in the World Cup final, but that's a relatively easier organisational trait, to get the rote sessions of lineouts and scrums there. And when you've been successful, to put the pressure on there, because if you can get on top, and this Lions test, the squad to me looks talented in lots of ways, but it doesn't look overtly physical. And I would think if South Africa would get into the right mood and say, right, all right, let's just climb into you and see what you've got.
I think the difference is, Brian, is that I think Gats and his team, in particular Robin McBride, understand very well what the Springboks will bring. I think if you look at the Springbok team selection, you understand where the challenge is going to be. I think, the World Cup was a little bit different. I don't think people had... they didn't take notice where the poor game against Wales played Japan in the quarterfinal. Before that, it was Italy. So that was the run into to the final. And I think this time Gats and Robin understand exactly what South Africa will bring. If you look at their team selection, they're not hiding any facts. They're not going to change their winning recipe. That is what they're going to do. And knowing the Springbok environment, they've got a saying, "The bear's in your boat. You've got to stop it." So that's going to be the challenge: is how the two packs match up to each other. And having coached in the Northern Hemisphere and experienced the intelligence and how the balance between power, forcefulness, and intelligence is coached in the Northern Hemisphere, it's going to be a very tough series. That the forward play is going to be very, very highly contested.
Matt, in the 2009 Lions series, there was a real famous dominance from the Springboks in the first 20 or 25 minutes in the scrum. You guys enjoyed a very similar dominance in the World Cup final. Is it an anchor of what the Boks need to do? They need to really try and make sure that they've got an opportunity to dominate there, or is it an overall physicality that you're talking about? Are you talking about all the tight five, or is this a front row aspect as well?
No, Bob. I think it's a total pack domination that they'll be looking for. That going into the World Cup, the maul was very important to South Africa. But we knew you couldn't only rely on the maul. And particularly having played England in the Test series in 2018, where they were so successful in nullifying our maul, we had to build a second platform to apply pressure. And I think that's a total pack mentality. That's not just the front row or the tight five, or it's a total pack mentality. And I think that's clear in Jock and Rossi's team selection. I think if you listen to the subliminal conversations and communication that's coming out of that camp, that is what's been said very clearly. And so that's coming. I'm very well. I hope to be back in South Africa at that stage and just be able to experience that, that whole build-up. Having had a foot in either camp and being able to pick up what each one is saying and knowing, what they're preparing for. I think that's going to be just an exciting challenge.
The back row is always, an interesting conundrum, usually seminal. And one of the things that I think shocked England in the World Cup final was, single South Africans were wrecking, whole breakdowns, and they couldn't get them off the ball. And they had to commit more people, and sometimes it was too late. And by that point, everything was static. And you've got different styles of players, clever players like Tipperick and so on around the breakdown. So it's a slightly different challenge. Will it be again, relying on, from a Bok point of view, do you think relying on the sheer physical presence, or will they be looking to be a bit cuter?
Well, I think what they do is what they do, Brian. It depends on whether Dwayne's availability. I think a lot hinges on Dwayne's availability, the way that they'll approach the breakdown. I think the four loose forwards that played at that period, Francois Lowe, Sia, Peter Steph, Dwayne, had very specific roles. And I think if you look at where Tom Curry has grown to, Toby, Faletau, Tipperick, Dad Byrne, who's going to be in the back row, who's going to be six. I think that's going to be a big selection point for the Lions. Who they're going to pick at six. Who's going to round off that loose forward combination? Who's going to be the guy coming off the bench? Is it going to be a Simmons coming off the bench to add something different? Those are going to be very, very big selections because you have to be able to confront what the South Africans do in the contact situation. And there the six is going to be a crucial selection, a very, very crucial selection.
Matt, now we could go on a long, long time, but I hear you're being called by the RFU. But thank you very much for sparing the time. Really interesting. Let's we're all looking forward to it, so let's hope you get back there and you can see it live. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Brian. You keep well.
Bob,
keep well. Thank you very much.
Well, they've named a 46-man squad, includes every available member of the 2019 World Cup squad. I don't imagine there'll be too many changes. And I also wonder this, when the game was virtually won against England, we then saw, the talents of the outside backs who, have brought something different to them. Do you think that they might be looking to bring them in earlier in the game, or will it simply be again, let's see what we do up front and then we'll go from there?
I mean, there's two questions there. The one is how much of that squad's going to be the same. I think 80-20. I think there's 80% of that 2019 starting lineup, injuries notwithstanding, would be close to the squad. He might try and prop it up with a few, again, bigger, beefier forwards if he needs them, or faster, skillful outside backs. And
how important is Duane Vermeulen in all this?
Problem is, Duane Vermeulen's a little bit of a problem for me because he is the essence of this team. He's been through the lows with this team. He went overseas, he came back, he committed to South African rugby, he won the World Cup. I mean, he basically was the guy who said, I don't want to be the skipper at all, I just want to do the work. Sia Khaleesi came in and was
that's a very rare player.
That was a rare player. And Sia Khaleesi was famously so emotionally overtaken by Duane being part of this and just basically being his 2IC who took none of the plaudits but did all the hard work with him, if you know what I mean. And that's an amazing relationship.
It is, yeah.
If he's out, who steps into Duane's role? So that is a factor for me. There are a couple of players. Peter Steph du Toit, I think, is really, his first game back in this Rainbow Cup, he was far and away the best player on the field, but he's had a really bad time of it. He's been off the field for 11 months. So nothing here is going to be easy. That said, if these guys are rested enough and they are able to play some time together, I think they're going to be able to at least repeat a bit of what they had at the World Cup, and maybe a bit more than that. And there's a couple of those players missing. Pollard's back. He's done well in the French league again. If he's at top of his game, he's a match for any fly-half in the world, and he's proved that. So there's a number of players in those positions who can do that. Well,
let's look at the dynamics of the series, because you have the warm-up games. You don't have as many as you used to have. So there's the phony war doesn't go on for as long. And we talked about Proudfoot about this. And, that first test, the Lions, and I can say this, I'm quite proud of it, actually. I was part of the 89 squad. We were the only modern Lions touring squad ever to lose a first test and win a series. That's how difficult it is as a tourist if you go down on the first one. So it's all important, and it sets the tone for that. Can you see anything in the lack of normal preparation from the Springbok point of view that might affect that dynamic? The imperative to win the first one, and the way in which you have to be flexible and either swallow defeat or build on victory thereafter. I mean,
I think it's not just me who sees this, not just you, because the administration have been all hands to the pumps to try and get decent games. They've managed to secure 2 games against Georgia. I'm not taking anything away from Georgia, who've got an amazing scrummaging outfit and have dominated a lot of teams in that area, but Georgia aren't Wales or Ireland or someone else where you would have had a set of warm-up matches and you could really have tested yourself. They could have had a rugby championship game or 2 against the best in the world. So I think that the administration, certainly the coaches sort of group, are saying we might need more together. So they've had a bit of a North versus South trial type game. I think they'll have a lot of live training. I think they'll have a lot of 20-minute chuckers of training. You play 80 minutes, but you have a little break in between, and then you reassess things. And besides that, they'll be saying, where else can we get the preparation? And that has to be just in the video, in the prep, in knowing what's coming at you. Surprising this, a recall from Morney Stein. He kicked the winning penalty in 2009, but he'd be 37. Surely not. Well, look, he's 3rd or 4th fly half in a squad. Russie has known him for a long time. He knows what he can give. I mean, he was player of the season overseas. He's gone back to the Bulls and dominated everybody, kicking out of hand. He doesn't look 37. Put it that way. True. I don't think he's going to be your starting fly half, but I tell you what, I'd rather toss him the ball with 10 minutes to go. If Pollard hurts a. Can I tell you what people forget? I remember being in Ireland when that penalty was awarded. I remember saying to the crowd in the question and answer session afterwards, of all the things that Ronan O'Gara could or should or might have done, he did the one that he shouldn't have done. He could have done anything else and it would probably been all right. But that because it was a successful kick, people forget how bloody difficult that kick was. Yeah, well, and that's the pressure. So Morné Steyn has done that. He's done it against the Lions. He's done it, in and around the Springboks for 9 years. I mean, he's won 3 Super Rugby titles. He's broken the record for most points in most of the tournaments and leagues he's played in. So, look, I've got a lot of respect for him. He's a bloody nice guy. He's just one of those guys who's a good. But just think about it. If 5 or 6 or 7 minutes to go, Pollard goes down with an ankle, and Russie goes, well, we need someone to get us the 3 points to draw this game or win us this game. We've got Morné Steyn on the bench. Are you putting him on? I certainly am. Absolutely fantastic weekend of playoff rugby in the Gallagher Premiership. I thought this would go this way. When Sale couldn't knock over Exeter last week, when they caught them a bit short and they didn't secure home advantage, I thought it would be a bit too much, and so it turned out. Exeter, although Sale battled hard, I thought Exeter always had that bit extra, and so it turned out. But Ashton Gate, Bristol Harlequins. What an extraordinary game that was. Ben Coles, the Telegraph rugby reporter, he was there. Ben, what was it like?
Hi, Brian. It was fairly extraordinary. Partly because where we were sort of sat in the press area, you had a section of Harlequin supporters to our right, about 500 of them, I would say, Just making the most fantastic noise.
You know what? I've never heard 500 middle-aged, middle-class people ever be as loud.
It was astonishing. Honestly, they were even from the very early stages of that first half, where they were about 21-0 down or 28-0 down. They were still making a fantastic noise, and that probably added to just what was an incredible spectacle. I mean, we've had some silly comebacks this season in the Premiership already. I mean, even in the last month, I think we had Wasps at London Irish and Exeter at Northampton. But this was just unbelievable, and yeah, comfortably the game of the season, and it would be in many other seasons as well.
I tell you what, momentum. People, some people say momentum is a thing that doesn't exist in sport. I tell you, it is. It does exist.
Absolutely.
And recognising it's going against you, knowing what to do about it and doing it is one of the hardest things in the world. But also and Pat Lam described it in a different sort of way during the match. He was saying, well, we had our purple patch, they're in their purple patch. We've got to make sure that theirs is less than ours. And what people miss was in the 4 tries that went over, 3 conversions didn't go over. And when you're looking at the final score at full time, but Quins just got there to get it into full time, the draw, and then at the extra time full time, the margin for error, that was just a couple of those, and so. Bristol, and actually, to be fair to them, not a lot of their fans made much about the high tackle incident at the end. When they were down to 13 men, I don't think they'd gone the length of the field anyway. But they didn't lose that game because of that decision. There were other reasons for that, and not just the ones where you say they didn't resist the Quins momentum, when they didn't make enough of what they should have done. And I thought at the time, if Dogbrandt hadn't have gone over, they would have walked that game, but he did. And was there any feeling about the significance of that at the time?
No, nothing at all, because it was such a bizarre try. Sort of, Max Maylands and Bristol had been pretty much perfect in that first half, and then just misses a high kick, and then Dombrandt runs one in. And I don't know necessarily at the time if Bristol fans were starting to get twitchy at that point, because their side had basically played the perfect first half hour of rugby and looked as though they could score, well over 50 points if they were going to carry on that way. But when Tyrone Green went over at the start of the second half and he sort of rolled over, spun his way over under the post for that try, that must have been when that must be when you start getting a bit nervous. And then the James Chisholm try, which is just the most bizarre Andy Uren's pass, just sort of ballooning into the air, and all of a sudden Chisholm's got it and he's nipped over by the post. Then it was chaos, frankly. Well,
I'll tell you when I thought Bristol fans might get a bit worried, and when I thought, as an ex-Quins captain, and trying to keep relatively neutral, but having the fans bit on my side, was this. And he had an extraordinary aim, Joe Marler, who was still knocking people down at the end of regular time and lasted all but 5 minutes of the whole game, including that. When he put John O'Four backwards in that scrum, in a couple of sort of quarter way through the second half, I thought this is a really big point, because Quins do not do this to sides normally. They don't dominate up front, and that came as a shock to Bristol. And I thought this is a very significant point, because I thought as a player, if I was in that front row and I was in that pack or in the Quins backs, I would look at that and think, this is really, really something, because now we've got a physical edge here, and towards the end of the game, they looked the fresher side all the way through, not just because of the momentum. But can I ask you this? There's been a lot made about Quins' coaching setup, not having a direct rugby, but also having fewer contact sessions. I don't know if that's right. I don't know whether they will describe anything to it, but they certainly look fresher to me.
Yeah, I'd agree. The fact that you've got Joe Marler pulling a 95-minute shift as a loosehead prop, and Danny Kerr was on well into the 90 minutes as well. Yeah, that does suggest that they have been sort of monitoring their players a lot better, and that is a transition that has come with a change in direction that they had with their coaching staff as well. They've sort of the whole project has been fascinating over the last 6 months, because they haven't done it in the conventional way. There hasn't been a head coach. It's sort of been by committee with all these assistants and a general manager, and by senior players. And part of that, I think, has been resting up a bit more in training, not sort of overdoing and overexerting themselves. And it did seem as though it shone through at the end. Some of the performances were astonishing, and I felt for Bristol as well, because their players were just were exhausted. I mean, Harry Thacker could barely walk, having had to sort of play 80 minutes plus, I think, out of position in the back row. You could just see the exhaustion. I would also point out that Charles Piutau going off on 42 minutes, 43 minutes for an HA, that was huge, I think, because he'd been producing arguably his best performance for Bristol, slicing through in the first half. And I think when they lost him, and then they gradually sort of other senior players sort of went off, Dave Atwood went off, Nathan Hughes went off, you could just sort of sense that they were maybe losing a little bit of the direction which Quins, through care and Marcus Smith, actually seemed to just be growing in confidence with.
One last question. Exeter there. Now, they've been there and done that. And I wrote in the Telegraph that it does take time to be able to come to terms with what's needed in the playoffs. And I think the loss for Bristol is a similar to the ones that Saracens suffered, the ones that Exeter suffered on their way to becoming these two hegemonous clubs. And I'm sure Bristol will learn if they keep the recruitment policies up and they keep the standards up. I would make Exeter favourites for the final, with the big caveat that, you know, if Quins do start to cut loose, then they're capable of doing anything. But this is the point. England almost nil New Zealand, can't do it again 2 weeks later. How is that the same with the Quins, do you think?
I definitely think there's a contrast in styles between how they play, and I think facing Bristol and the way that Bristol like to play, with the width that Bristol play with, and that sort of more open style, definitely suited Quins, which is why you saw Louis Liner and Tyrone Green in particular play exceptionally well, and Joe Marchant, to be fair. I think with Exeter and their power game and the way they are set up, I think that will be a big challenge for Harlequins. To get parity there at a minimum is going to be a massive challenge. And that's not to say that they can't do it. I mean, we just talked about Joe Marler with John Arthur, but I do feel that Exeter, with the experience factor and just the way that they're able to dominate sides at the set piece, that's really going to test Harlequins and might just be the difference in the final.
I've just been thinking and mulling over the Saracens securing their spot back into the Premiership, winning the Championship. It was a big win over Ealing. With these other sides starting to play the kind of rugby that Saracens dazzled us with, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, are they just going to come gliding back in, or are they going to find that this is something that they've really got to shore up the playing numbers and I suppose have more difficult matches in front of them in the future?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's almost as intriguing as when they went down to the Championship and sort of wondering how they get on against the likes of Cornish Pirates and those sort of teams. And now coming back, whether anything has changed. I quite liked their social media stuff on, I think yesterday after they won, I think all the photos they put up had the tagline like, "Did you miss us?" with a question mark, because I think they're gonna come in and for them they will just want to carry on where they left off. It's almost been like a season of purgatory in the Championship, and they want to come back and continue where they are. And the fact that so many players are coming back, Max Malins and Ben Earl at Bristol are great examples of players who've gone away from Saracens on loan, had pretty brilliant seasons, and are now coming back to just bolster the squad. And there's loads of those players sort of coming back from loan spells who are going to be better off maybe for a bit of time away and are going to come back with a purpose. And that's to win another championship, because ultimately the mentality at Saracens is going to be, we were wronged. I think that's how they still feel, and that's probably
they weren't, by the way.
No,
but it's how they position it for themselves. Yeah, exactly.
But it's the easiest bulletin board material in a changing room that you'll ever get, is that this is our chance to sort of come back and prove everybody wrong, and that makes them extremely, extremely dangerous. So yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect Saracens to be in the playoffs next season at least. No, I mean they'll be coming back all guns blazing, really.
We shall see. Ben, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Time for some fans' questions. Bob, what kind of health is South Africa and rugby in currently? Because I tell you what's confusing over here. You see a couple of sides playing in this and a couple of sides playing in that, and the things move up and down, and then because of COVID it's been disjointed. The Four Nations has been all over the sort of place. It's very difficult to get a handle on that, especially when you see a result like you said at the weekend. Where do you think they are?
Look, Brian, I have been vocal for a long time that the Super Rugby model of more is more just wasn't working.
Yeah.
We had these bloated tables, a million different permutations, 20 odd teams, playing each other, and it became boring. I really like where this United Rugby Championship has gone. Martin and I and his team have said, actually, less is more. Actually, we don't want to play over a test match window. We don't want to play with teams that are lacking players or missing players.
Yeah.
We want to play quality games, and this really lends itself to that. So I think South African rugby are actually, one of the sort of unintended consequences, I think. Well, I'm not saying unintended, but it will be good for them. They'll earn a bit more, play a bit less, and they'll have exposure to the international teams. I think South African rugby, if I look at what the reports that I hear on the financial situation, South African rugby franchises are in trouble. It's a rich man's folly to own one little team and then hope that you're going to make money out of it too. Maybe own the league or do something like that. These teams have been struggling for a long time. Western Province is famously bankrupt. The Sharks have had an overseas.
This is like the Welsh regions who historically have underperformed, and yet Wales have keep winning Grand Slams and contributing to the Lions and so on. You can't underestimate how many people. At last count, it was 400 odd. How many South Africans are playing out of South Africa? So whatever you say, this question about the health of South African rugby in South Africa, this dimension is here.
The dimension is here, and this is the first time that they're going to get a legitimate podium to show themselves off. And I see these young players. We saw Tyron Green play for Harlequins this weekend. Is he a contender for the Boks? Maybe. In France, there's 150 players who've been in and around Super Rugby, provincial and Springbok level rugby, who could easily say, oh, well, now I'll go back to the Stormers and I'll play, because I'll end up playing against, the Scarlets, and I'll play against Leinster, and I'll play the big games.
And I tell you what, you look at the sale contingent and all that sort of stuff. Very rarely do you see a South African who's a make weight, just out making the squad numbers up.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen. They are picked, and they generally are the leading lights in whatever they're supposed to be doing.
We had, and I'll get the exact numbers wrong, but we had some stats come through the other day about the quality of South African schoolboy rugby. Now, I don't know what it is that they put in the porridge, like you said, or the soil, or they grow up, but the best school in New Zealand came to a national schools festival, and they got trounced 72-10 by Paul Roos Gymnasium, which was the best team in South Africa for that year. And everyone was like, where are those players? They'd all pre-signed contracts in France and Italy and gone overseas. So you don't see them come through the system. So it's a whole lost generation who I now think we will get to see play.
This is a perennial one. Do you think any of this could lead to South Africa joining the Six Nations further down the line?
Well, go to the UK for a potentially one bad night's sleep, and you play against Wales, Ireland, England, Scotland, France, Italy. Would you rather do that or constantly be going for a 9-hour time change to New Zealand and get battered in Wellington at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night? I think if they get their game together, they'll play less of that of the Rugby Championship, as they call it, and more into the games here. And maybe that means that the autumn internationals, which were the traditional one, now leak over and you play into the Six Nations Championship, or maybe a qualifying version of it or something like that. I think those are quality test matches.
Well, funny enough, I had lunch with someone from CVC. I won't mention any names. And let's put it this way, nothing is off the table, shall we say.
Well, they've been very smart with some of their investments in sport around the world. I wouldn't see them making a bad decision on this one.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's all we have time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Huge thank you to my co-host, as usual, Bob Skinstad, straight to the point and points of insight as well. And to my guests, the England's forward coach, Matt Proudfoot, and Ben Coles of the Telegraph. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe? It doesn't cost you anything. Check out the previous episodes, including our ministry's Brian's Lions, where I've looked back on previous Lions tours with those who've experienced them firsthand. And let me tell you, even though I would say this, wouldn't I, they're good. They're really good. I'll be back next week to look back at the first warm-up game for the Lions, but until then, bye-bye.